Good morning. Oh, let there be light. Oh, my. I like Bertie's PowerPoint this morning. I'm sort of a car guy. And so when I mentioned restoration projects, her mind immediately went to old automobiles. So she asked if I thought it would be okay to put them up there because she wondered whether or not people would think there was any spiritual significance attached to old automobiles. And I assured her that trying to restore an old automobile will bring out the very best in you and the very worst in you. There are days when you may not know what your name is because you're uttering so many expletives you don't know what to do. So it is a transformation project of sorts. Last week when I finished the lesson that I was talking about, I sort of mentioned a colleague's book titled Going Deep in Life and Leadership, and talked some about his thoughts about the concept of insights. And today I want to share one of his insights because it's an insight that I have never considered, I think, from the perspective that he gave it. So let me kind of set it up first. The backstory is Ian, the person who wrote this book, is in Switzerland, and he's meeting with a group of worldwide executives, and they're trying to come up with spiritual concepts that they can introduce into their corporations and into their leadership styles. And all of us who have worked in the workforce in these great United States know that some of the executives that we work with have no spiritual concepts whatsoever, or it seems as if they have none. So anyway, they're talking about leadership and what does it mean and how does it look and feel and what does the concept of God have to even do with leadership and those kinds of questions. So there's one genius in the group who comes up with what he thinks is a life-shattering question that he thinks is beyond profound. He says, if God can do anything, can God make a rock so heavy that God can't lift it? So you can imagine, you almost have to imagine Ian and know Ian, who is very serious about the spiritual aspect of things. So this question he thought was juvenile, and he sort of ignored the guy and wouldn't even answer the question. And then he goes on to say, can a person understand spirituality if that person is not already spiritual or does not think of themselves as being spiritual? And so he's asking this question to try to quiet out the other question that the executive asked. And then he goes on to say, because those who are spiritual understand that they are spiritual, they already have a sense that there is more to them than meets the eye, so to speak. And then he goes on to suggest that people who are not spiritual, such as the person who asked the question, those whose hearts are not ready for spirituality, may never understand spiritual ideas and spiritual concepts and spiritual references. And it's an interesting question because, as many of us know who consider ourselves to be spiritual seekers, it sometimes seems as if we're wandering in a world alone because many people have the exact opposite in their consciousness, or so it seems to us. So they're trying to better understand this idea and what it means to be spiritual. And to understand it, I think we have to take the premise to another level. Because if we believe we are born into this incarnation as being spiritual beings, if we are really born to be that, then there's no way to move beyond that. The only thing that can take us beyond that is our thinking and our believing, and the message that we carry around in our hearts and in our souls. But exploring this idea led him to another person, a psychologist. And this psychologist's name is Dr. Morris Massey. And he talks about a concept that he calls SEE, S-E-E. And it's an acronym for significant emotional events. Significant emotional events. And the premise behind his delving into this concept of significant emotional events was based on his belief that each person in the world undergoes at some point or another in their lifetime trauma that makes a significant impact on their consciousness and on who they are. And as a result of that impact, many times people are plunged into negativity, or the impact can inspire them to become much more than they are. And so there's a choice being made from that perspective. Sometimes those events set us on the way to happiness and on the way to joy and on the way to success, and then sometimes they can shove us into the depth of emotional pain. So there are often times that those painful events can be so significant that we can spend a lifetime trying to get beyond them, if you will. So in essence, he's saying that the painful events in our lives can become a foundation for how we live our lives, just as well as the other important emotional events can become a foundation for us. And sometimes it's up to us to figure that out. So here at Unity of San Antonio, one of our core values here is transformation. And transformation is about survival. It's about understanding that life is filled with ups and downs, and that the way we survive through those ups and downs is by continually transforming our lives. And most of the times, the events in our lives, when they do happen, are unexpected. So there's no way to be prepared for them other than being prepared spiritually. So I have a couple of personal experiences that I want to share with you that I think were significant emotional events that made huge impacts on my life. The first one happened when I was around 6 years of age. And I had a childhood friend who lived out in the country, so to speak. I mean, we were in a rural community, a town of 6,000, but we were separated by town and country, if you can imagine that. So he had to ride the school bus to school every day. And one morning, when the school bus went to pick him up, he and the rest of his family, all of the kids had gotten on the bus but him. And the driver went to back up, and the school bus ran over him and killed him. And he was 6 years old at the time, and I was 6 years old, and he was my best friend. And the things that I remember about that experience was all the wondering and all the fear that I had around that experience. And then being told by well-meaning parents and adults that it was okay because he was in heaven. And that didn't make sense to me, even at 6 years of age. And so I carried that event with me throughout my childhood. So you fast forward another 5 years, and I'm working up at the fairground because the carnival was in town. And what happens in small towns when carnivals come, they usually hire children out of the area to help them out, setting up tents and running errands and so forth. So I'd been to the fairground and helping to set up tents and so forth, made myself a little money, and then I hitchhiked back home. So it's a couple of miles away. And I had the guy that I was riding with stop because there was a grocery store that I wanted to go to. And this is where I'm embarrassed to say my love for donuts almost got me killed. So I get out of the car, and he drives off, and I immediately run across the road, and a car hit me. So the car knocks me up in the air, and I'm landed, and of course the driver of the car panics, and he gets out and he asks, "Are you all right?" So I guess I was. I stood up, had a little scratch over my eye. Then I went in to get me 2 donuts, and after that, all was well in my life. So following that experience, went home, my parents found out about me getting hit by a car, not watching what I'm doing, which is the foundation under it. And of course, there's punishment for not being mindful of doing the right thing. So another significant emotional event. I'm growing, I'm unfolding, I'm learning, and there's good stuff going on, and there's bad stuff going on. And I discovered the wonderful effects of alcohol at 13 years of age. And during that 13th year, I almost died from alcohol poisoning. Significant emotional events rumbling around in my head, trying to understand all of the stuff that life brings to us and how it makes an impact. And so from that point forward, from 13 forward, all the way to the age of 38, alcohol was a large part of my daily experiences. Much of it linked to those 2 major significant events, but also to a lot of other major significant emotional events that was taking place in my life. Segregation, being told you're not good enough, all of the stuff that we get from our world around us. And the question becomes, how do we find a foundation for ourselves throughout these experiences that enables us, number one, to get our heads put on straight, and then start to live the kind of life that we want to live. And it was a struggle, and it was a journey. And it's one that to some degree or another, all of us experience at some level. In the religion of the Hindus, Hinduism, there's a goddess called Shiva, and she is the deity who represents transformation. The Hindus believe that transformation takes place through the concepts of destruction and then restoration, tearing down and then rebuilding. They are reminded through that process that endings that take place in their lives are actually beginnings, and that the world is always undergoing that process of ending and beginnings. And so it gives us a new perspective on life. Then we get to understand that birth and death and then rebirth are all the processes that we talk about in Christianity. In Christianity, we believe that many facets of transformation take place through the processes of changing our thoughts, changing our beliefs, changing the way we see the world, all those things that we've made a habit of doing without really thinking about them. So I'm going to list a few what I call restoration projects. And if you think about these projects in the context that they're not literal, they are spiritual ideas, you might be able to find a few valuable perspectives on them that can make an impact on your life. So let's begin with what I call the Garden of Eden process. Adam and Eve, which is one of the greatest myths in our spiritual religious process. So they're in the Garden of Eden, and there's an order that's been set. There's everything in this garden that you could want. Everything. There's abundance of all things. And so Adam and Eve are set free in this garden to do as they choose. But they have been given certain instructions, and those instructions were to partake of everything in there, but to do so in an order. And so, as we know from the story, they go through the process, and Eve bites the apple, takes the apple from the tree. Well, a lot has been made in religion about that being the first sin. It really doesn't have anything to do with sin. It doesn't have anything to do with gender, really. What it really has to do with is it was not in the order that had been specified. The truth of the matter is it was a green apple. And those of us who grew up around apple trees knows the impact of too many green apples. So all of this mythology, that mystery has been built around, is really just based on sound, practical, everyday ideas. Do things in order, because when we do things in order, we have time to think about them, we have time to plan accordingly, and then we can set an order that works for us in our lives, as opposed to going about things haphazardly. And if you've done either one of them, then you know very well what I'm talking about. So this spiritual stuff really boils down to plain old common sense. There are some things you don't do. You don't jump out of the car and immediately run to the grocery store to buy donuts without looking to see if another car is coming. And it sounds pretty silly and simple today, but the story behind that is I could have lost my life. And the same with my childhood friend. I mean, it was a traumatic event to think about it even today. And it starts one at a very young age thinking about the process of life and death and how do we want to live our lives. And it took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to live my life. So order is a very important part of the spiritual journey. The next thing about that story in the garden was the issue of impatience. With patience, the apple would have been ready to eat. But sometimes we don't want to wait for things to be ready. We want to make them ready in our own time frame. And as we know, that often too can backfire on us. You ever been in business and you're trying to get a client to do something? You know you have to take time with that client to explain what it is that you have to offer that can make his business better. You just can't rush into it and say, buy this because it's the best thing since sliced bread. So it's all about taking time to understand that there are things that we have to do, and if we don't do them, then destruction takes place and we have to start over and rebuild. reconstruct, so to speak. So there are a lot of restoration points in our life. Sometimes we lose sight of the most important principle of all of this stuff. And I'll go back to the Garden of Eden. The whole idea of the Garden of Eden was based on one concept, and that is love. That's where it began. God is love. And the domicile or the valley or the home of God is love. The Garden of Eden is based on love. So if we love ourselves enough to understand that, and to understand that everything we do, when we do it in love and with love, then we can expect the highest and best results from it. I think Carl Jung sums it up perhaps better than anyone else for me. He said, the untransformed human exists where the opposites are fiercely and hopelessly entangled in each other, and thereby in a conflicted embrace. It is only by rising above that conflicted embrace that we, as human beings, truly begin to know who we are. Think about that. All the conflict that goes on in our heads, in our hearts, in our lives can be risen above once we make the decision to live beyond it. Sounds simple, not that easy. God bless.
This message has been brought to you by Unity Church of San Antonio to open your heart, transform your life, and celebrate your divine identity. Visit us on the web at www.unityofsa.org. And remember, you are the light of God, so shine brightly today.